Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. We fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom.
On this episode of Cigars and Sea Stories, Bennett and Mike are sitting down to talk with Mr. Jeff Loeb. He is a fellow Marine. He is a Vietnam combat veteran. Held a dual MOS of artillery fire direction control and was an interpreter in Vietnam in 1968 and 1969, serving with Headquarters 111 in Khe Sanh, Qua Viet, Hill 29, and Bravo 111, Charlie 2, Con Thien, Hill 55, and the Riviera south of Marble Mountain. Got to get through that intro. So, all around a badass dude. Also, on top of this, you've got to read all of these different jobs that he's held along the way. It's insane. He's been a bartender, a waiter, a radio reporter, a carpenter, a farmer, construction worker, professional photographer, assistant city manager. All along that pathway, he's gotten a PhD in English, which gotten is not a word, so you can correct me on that later, from the University of Kansas, and taught literature and writing for 30 years there at Johnson County Community College. So I would like to welcome Mr. Jeff Loeb, and we're going to get into some of these different works that he's done and his transition along the way and everything else, and welcome. It's an honor to have you, sir.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity and just to talk to Marines and about stuff, you know. So I'm ready to go at it.
It is therapeutic.
Yes, it is therapeutic. Thank you. The peanut gallery in the back with Bennett over there.
Yeah, exactly.
Every once in a while, it sounds like he's in a corner. It's weird. No one knows what he's doing under the poncho liner.
Or the Max Hedron stuff. I don't know. It's because I have a bunch of kids running internet.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense. Gets a little shoddy. Yeah. So when you left the service in general, you wound up going towards literature, writing as a whole, writing on the subject. I see that you also have work specifically on the Vietnam War. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, actually, I'll kind of go backwards simply because the most recent article that I published was in the present, War Literature and the Arts, the journal put out by the Air Force Academy, and it is a retrospective that I wrote during the last year of a variety of events that happened to me, all post Marine Corps. But all of which refer back to the experiences there and in Vietnam and not in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. But before that, I had made it my business to not simply write about myself, which I had done in various articles and pieces, as you call them, but more than that, I think, or mostly, it was about other people's work. That is, I don't know, I had maybe like 40 articles published about different, combinations of novels and memoirs and works by poets, and, thematic analyses of them and things like that to see, what are these people ultimately all saying in the same or in different ways, but about the same set of circumstances or closely knitted sets of circumstances. So that's really been, as much as anything, my main endeavor as a writer is to explore the literature or the experience of Vietnam for these many years.
Right. Wow. Jeez Louise. And what kind of brought this out as far as how did this wind up becoming a passion after you've left service? This is a commonly asked question.
Well, that's kind of interesting because it did not become a passion right after I left the service, and it took a good 30 years for it to become that. And I mean, that's when all those other jobs that you that you talk, none of which I had for very long, obviously, if I had that many of them, but that, those various jobs that I had were going on during that period of time before I actually even took upon myself the whole business of writing. I'll tell you the truth. When I got back from Vietnam and I went to college right away, it was a very strange universe because. First of all, I sort of just hid. I would sit in classes and I would be intimidated in a lot of ways, by people who had vocabularies that were well beyond mine. Certainly not beyond my understanding, but I just, how it is. If you're in spend a year or 2 years in the Marines and most of that's in a combat zone, you have a vocabulary of about 300 words. Working vocabulary. It's fuck this or that motherfucker this, or whatever, some variation on that. Yeah. I mean, some variation on that word. And so, as soon as I got back, I got out. I flew into Treasure Island, or I flew into San Francisco, and they shipped me to Treasure Island. A week later, I was getting on a plane to fly back to Kansas City, Missouri, and ultimately a bus to Junction City, Kansas. So, it was not 2 months later, or about 3 months, that I was in school, in college, and again, it was just the strangest universe for me, and I did not have any ability to communicate whatsoever socially, or on a professional or student level, whatever. And so what that did is made me extremely angry. I'd sit there and I'd have these fantasies about wringing somebody's neck. I mean, the proverbial person that just sits there and won't shut their mouth. And you just hate them. You just think about garroting them, or how they teach you in the boot camp, how you get somebody from behind and you lock around his neck, and then you jump backwards and break his neck, stuff like that. I would sit here and think about it, and it was, and of course I had no social life because I couldn't relate to women, and I couldn't relate to anybody, to be honest. But I did not know how to talk to women, so if I'd go to bars and things, I'd just stand there, and it really took me a long time to kind of even form a social life, or ability to have a social life. And by a long time, I mean several months, and at least. So I didn't even envision writing at that point. I was going to go to law school, which I actually did start and then dropped out. Moved to the East Coast, and that's when I did all the bartending and all this kind of stuff. Kind of went back to school, moved around the country, had these various jobs and things like that. But it was somewhere around 1990, late 80s or 90s, that this thing happened inside of me. I started thinking about not just the Marine Corps, but about combat. And the strangest thing was, I wasn't, what the pictures that were coming into my head were absolutely not possible for me, because they were of like Korea. If you can, I don't even know if you can understand what I'm talking about, but
yeah, I
had this image in my mind that kept occurring over and over again. It must have come from like when I was a kid. We would go to the Boys Gun Club in the basement of the municipal building, and the police would show us how to shoot 22s and stuff. But while we were waiting to be on the firing line there, they'd have us all sitting up in folding chairs up in the gym watching The Big Picture. And I don't know if you ever saw The Big Picture or not. Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, there were all these documentaries that were made right after World War II, black and white. All of them were, and there's a voiceover, that would be describing what's going on, and you'd see these people slogging here and there, and of course a lot of, in those days they weren't very, I think they were not permitted to actually show anyone, in violent circumstances. So they would just typically be tanks rolling here, and then you're being told this and that. So anyway, I mean, this is the kind of picture I had, and it was all in black and white. So but for out of nowhere, all these pictures started just plaguing me. And I would sit there and I would be in tears almost, because I'd be sitting there looking at the Marines, coming out of the Chosin Reservoir, and down that long road, 70 miles. And it was just heartbreaking to me, even though I had never had an experience like that. I mean, I had Khe Sanh, which, would certainly have some kind of parallels with that.
Drastic effect,
but,
sure.
Yeah, right. But I didn't know where it was coming from. So I started thinking about it, and I said, I'm gonna write about it. And I started writing about it, and I found myself, I'd done a lot of writing over the years. I'd been a reporter, and I'd done that kind of stuff. It wasn't like I hadn't been trained to write, but I'd never really written about myself or any of my experiences. So I started in. It was pretty lame, and that's about the time I went back to graduate school to get my PhD. Well, by then I could handle the students and the professors, and in fact I was as old as some of the professors or older at that particular point. Mm-hmm. And but it was really all about research, and I had to obviously choose a dissertation topic, and I didn't have a notion what I was going to do, but the result of all these kinds of weird images that were coming up to me and these sort of meltdowns I was having was that I got interested in something I had never really read very much of, and that was the literature of the Vietnam War, even though, that was my war. And I knew, obviously I knew all kinds of things about it, historically speaking, but I didn't really know what, literature had come out of there. So I started just on my own reading that stuff. The obvious ones, Larry Heinemann, Tim O'Brien, people of that nature. But the more I got into it, the broader I saw the whole field was, and it just got more and more. And it came time to look at the dissertation topic, and I said, I'm going to write about this. So I went out and I found a dissertation advisor who, was amenable to that, and a team of people, professors, who'd be on my committee, whom were amenable also. And a couple of them had been in the Army way back. None of them had been in war, but they all kind of knew the ropes. Mm-hmm. So that's what attracted me to the topic. And once I immersed myself in it, of course, there were hundreds of novels.
Right.
And
oh yeah, of course.
And memoirs and things like that. I think the number grew over 1,000 actually, if you start counting the real the shoot 'em up types and and everything like that. The whole range of things. While I was working on that dissertation, I think the number was, there was some bibliography that came out that had over 1,000 works on it, and that doesn't include films. So there was all this to take in, and I was reading constantly, and I was trying to take notes and write about it. And in parallel to this, I got interested in of all things, slave narratives, because one of the professors I had that I was pretty close to, that was his specialty. So, there's no real connection between the two, except that what I found out was that there were extremely, of the 1,000 or so works that were written, less than 10 had been written by black soldiers and Marines. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but, that I surmised. And then there were a couple of poets, Yusuf Kumanyak being the most famous. And the books were impossible to find. They'd gone into print, gone right out of print. And so I'd have to get them through interlibrary loan, and things like that. Well, I read them, and I read them. Nobody else had written anything about any of them. So I said, well, I'm going to give a good part of my dissertation to that particular set of works. And so I broke them down thematically, and looked at, how those particular writers were approaching themselves, really, in a way.
Sure, yeah.
Most of them were memoirs. And how they were approaching the topic, of their service, because it's a far different breed. It was I don't want to be cliche, it's a different breed of cat, but it was just a far different experience that I was reading about if you were a black soldier or a Marine than if you were a white one. Now, I was aware of that anyway, just from being there. But the dimensions, the degree to which that was occurred, that perception by those writers was undertaken was pretty astounding. So that was part of what I was up to, and I was searching for a focus, and that became part of it. The rest of the focus, just on the literature in general, was things that I could relate to, and those were people talking about what happened to them after the fact. When they came home, not just when they were there, but after they came home, what they faced, what they dealt with. Because as I've probably implied, I basically blotted it out for 30 years, and didn't have anyone to talk to about it with.
Right. Sure.
So,
well, and that's the whole.
Anyway,
that's the whole point right there. I mean, that's exactly why Cigars and Sea Stories exist, is because we became diffused back out into the population, and we find each other in these little. Bennett and I bumped into each other at Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans, and I mean, you're in such a slim minority of the population as far as this veteran subculture, but then also you're an entrepreneur on top of it. I mean, you're a glutton for punishment. So finding each other out in the wilderness is fantastic, and that's where he and I started engaging in stuff, and that's when we stumbled across this, just knowing the isolation effects, and being able to kind of share and bring this across to other generations, other wars. It's a fantastic experience, especially now with modern technology and podcasting the way that it is. I mean, you can be in the middle of nowhere and plug in the earbuds and listen to Sea Stories. You could be in the middle of Khe Sanh. I mean, I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, moved into the future. That's true. You could have been. Communication at Khe Sanh was iffy at best. I mean, basically we had field radios that required wires. I mean, not all of them, of course. I actually carried a Prick 25 for a while. Do you guys know what that is? A PRC 25.
I've heard of them.
Well, they weigh 25 pounds.
Right.
I don't think that's why the nomenclature's.
We carried, when I was in the Corps, we still carried Prick 77s.
Okay.
So that was a little bit later generation, but now it's like a dinosaur. Like Eddie's like, what the hell's a Prick 70? Or Mike's like, what the hell's a Prick 77? Right. You might know what they are, but
No, we had Prick 77s.
Did you?
And Prick 98s.
No way. Prick 98s.
Anyway. Dear Lord.
Yeah, I've never really talked with anyone about the communications part of it, but I know, obviously in my case, carrying one plus you carry the rest of your gear is a load, and it was that's not to mention that you're a target,
right?
I'm happy for this particular opportunity because no matter how many veterans I've actually had the privilege of meeting now especially in the last 3 years, to be honest, 3 to 4 years. There's still this kind of inability to communicate with anybody who has not been there, and as I used to say, seen the elephant. And you ever heard that before?
Yeah.
Civil War term.
Yep.
But anyway, I have gotten to know. In fact, I'm going to a presentation tomorrow night at Strand Bookstore in New York City, in Manhattan. I've gotten to know a lot of people from you guys' conflicts who are writers, and virtually all of them who are around New York I've met at one time or another. Or been to readings from them and stuff like that, and it's really a far different experience that when I talk with them that they had, not so much in whichever zone it was. Certainly it was different for reasons of technology, like we were talking about, and equipment and the terrain and the circumstances and everything like that. But what was mainly different was that, everybody joined. Now, in the Marine Corps, we were virtually we all joined, obviously. There were a few draftees. The Marine Corps got desperate for a little while and had to draft. But generally speaking, in talking with people, in my opportunities to talk to people after Vietnam, they were all basically draftees, and they had not been to college, as an example, even though I hadn't really either beforehand. But many of them never did go. They basically had blue-collar jobs, or whatever, how I'd meet them. But the difference is that virtually everybody that that I know around here who has served in Iraq or Afghanistan was already a college graduate when he went in, or she. There are a lot of women too. And I don't know what you guys' circumstances were, but that makes a huge difference for me, because I can talk about whatever. It doesn't have to be about literature, but I can talk about history as an example, with a kind of knowledge that they have a certain sense of what, where this happened within a larger string of historic events.
Sure.
It's like you guys probably know about either the Middle East or about Asia, in a longer historical sense. And I know about Vietnam, as by comparison. Most of those people who came back, and especially if they were grunts, they didn't have the slightest idea where they'd been, why they'd been there, what the hell got them there,
right.
Except what happened to them. So anyway, I'm talking too much, but
no, it's fantastic.
No, that's what it's about.
Well, and it's funny because you bring up the circumstances. I myself enlisted straight out of high school, and
did you? Okay.
Oh yeah, and it was one of those where it was we were already at war. I understood what we were doing. I knew that I was going to be a Marine. I knew that I was going to be in the infantry, but I enlisted 03XX, and then you figure it out. In the
you enlisted as that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I enlisted as an infantryman, knowing that I was going to go in. It's not that I understood the experience that I was about to go through, but I definitely understood what I was getting myself into. Like, whoa, hold on, time out. All right, that the Marines, especially the infantry, like, you're guaranteed to go to war. But, I totally got that.
Yeah, it is 100% guaranteed.
Well,
you're right.
A lot of people, it's fluff and these different things that come along with it. What I honestly love about the Marine Corps, and I've said this probably 1,000 times, is the fact that we do a lot more with a lot less. We share a different brotherhood. The title is lifelong. It's just a whole different experience. But I think Marines especially embody more so everything that is a gang, or like a gang of warriors, than
the largest street gang in the world, man.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Like a massive hunting club.
Yeah.
So it's funny because in my experiences, I met a lot of college graduates. Not a lot. More than I thought I was going to meet in the enlisted side, who had already graduated and decided to go the enlisted route based upon the occupation that they were going to be able to have. One being a scout sniper, graduated with honors from Boston College, and then wound up being a scout sniper. And I just thought that was fantastic. And I bring him up because he was in the hooch next door. But it's like, it's one of those things where I think a lot more of us, just in being an all-volunteer force, we look at it more so as a prestigious pathway to go on towards something else. It should be sought after as a legitimate pathway, more so like a management course. That's why I look at the billet and the ability to train more than I look at the rank and the years of service. So I look at the experience and, but it's different though. Like we were talking about this before when we had our phone call. I served 8 years. For certain circumstances, I got out. Otherwise, probably I'd still be in. I don't know. But you know how it is. Everything happens for a reason. All of these other different good things. So, but it's just different experiences.
Yeah. Well, I really never had any intention of staying in. Obviously, I didn't. I had one temptation. They right out of ITR, it was probably not just me, but a couple of people pulled them aside and said our scores were high enough that would you like to be an officer? And I said, oh, no, I don't know about this, So, but they tempted me. They tempted me enough that I kind of got derailed from the cohort that I was with by a week. So I went through ITR then with a bunch of people I didn't know, because they just put me in casual for a week while I sat there and thought about it and said, no, wait a minute, why do I want to spend another 4 years on top of this and be a second lieutenant, which is like, as far as I was concerned, that was like the worst thing in the world you could be. But,
it's like a death sentence at that point.
Yeah, I came to my senses.
Yeah. God, that's funny. Jesus.
So what was your what was your MOS again?
Well, my initial MOS was 0811, which is fire direction control, and that gets assigned right at last day of boot camp or second last day or something like that. They get you around. Probably the same thing happened to you, and unless you knew already what it was going to be, then it wasn't a surprise. But so from there, they ship you to directly to ITR, and then to maybe schools and or possibly leave or whatever. In our case, what they did was, once you'd gone through the school, and I was maybe a month long at Pendleton, they shipped us up to a different part of Pendleton, San Onofre, I think, for staging. And I don't know if do you still have staging? Because it's either a unit. Now there are unit rotations and things. It was just kind of all individual rotations in those days. It didn't go over as a unit. So, do you still do staging?
No, we all deploy and return as a unit now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, see,
there's no individual stuff. Which when I hear stories from back then, I don't want to cut you off, but I can't believe the way that they did it with you guys.
Well, it's kind of hard to me to believe in retrospect now. Yeah. So we I think everybody talks about the old Corps and that kind of thing, and I have all the respect in the world for anybody who was on Iwo Jima or the Chosin Reservoir. They're sort of like the icons for me, but so I'm not certainly trying to not set myself up as being one of those or anybody with me, but it was pretty crude by comparison to, as you said, like the Army or the Air Force and everything like that, equipment for nothing else, but just the way they do things. And in order to prepare you to go to Vietnam, now if you were a grunt, you already had done some of this stuff. If you'd gone through 0300 training for whatever reason, mortars, whatever it would be. But so they sent us for this thing called staging for about a month, and we learned to fire all these weapons and to handle this equipment that we otherwise would not have had much contact with. And with the expectation that every Marine's a rifleman, no matter what your MOS is. So I assume they still say that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
But anyway, so after a month of staging, which you go get on the plane, you go, they fly you, they take you on the bus right on out there to, to whatever airport you're flying out of, and you're gone, and you're in Okinawa before you know it. And which was a kind of a secondary staging for a few days there, and then to Vietnam, and then when you got to Da Nang Air Base, you got assigned, I think, right there, and somebody picked you up and took you up here via Jeep or chopper or whatever it was, and so that you found out what you're doing. In my case, what happened was right after staging, where everybody was getting ready to get on the plane, one of these jerked me by the sleeve things again, and they said, listen, we have got this program opening up for a kind of a short course for Vietnamese language, and you scored high on your tests, and would you, we'd like to send you up to the Army's language school in Monterey and at least learn rudimentary Vietnamese. So that's what happened. So I went up and spent it was about 4 months, I guess, altogether in Monterey. You really, to learn language, you really have to spend probably 2 years. immersion, and at least a year. So what I knew was pretty slim, and I never really had a chance to use it for the first 6 months that I was even there, because I was up in I was in I-Corps the whole time. But do you know what I-Corps is?
Tell our listeners, how's it work?
Okay. Well, there are 4 so-called corps in Vietnam, going from the bottom, which was 4 Corps, which was down, real down in the kind of riverine area. 2 Corps, which I think was where Saigon was. 3 Corps, which is kind of where the Central Highlands were. 4 Corps, which is the DMZ, Khe Sanh, just across from Qua Viet over to Laos, and all along the DMZ, the Hai Van. Not Hai Van Pass. That was part of it, but I mean I forgot the name of the river now. Sorry. Anyway, I-Corps it was called because it was 1 Corps, so Roman numeral 1, and it got translated into I-Corps.
I-Corps.
So that's where the Marines were. The Marines had I-Corps. Now Air Cav was there, 101st, some other people, and stuff like that. Korean Marines were there too. But if you're a Marine, you're going to be an I-Corps, and in my case, I was in I-Corps all along the DMZ or in the western Khe Sanh, up where they call it Parrot's Beak, which is up near Laos. And the river kind of goes in a certain way there that makes it look like a parrot's beak. So, and it's all a free fire zone. And the only Vietnamese we ever saw, we were shooting at or getting shot at by or getting incoming or whatever,
No need to interpret.
We saw, yeah, right. The only live Vietnamese individual I ever saw in that, at least in Khe Sanh, was a guy who managed to walk through the wire and surrender, gave himself up.
Holy shit.
And he'd gotten all the way inside the wire. He was inside the compound, and nobody knew how he got there. And he had maybe tunneled. I don't even know sure, but I did see him, and they had him, of course, that roped down about 6 ways from Sunday by the time everybody saw him. But anyway, point is, Mike, there was no chance to use Vietnamese language there. So it was only really in the latter part of my tour when I was down south of Da Nang, in that what I call the Riviera, or what they call it. It was called the Riviera.
Right.
Chesty Puller's son, Louis Puller Jr., wrote the wonderful memoir, Fortunate Son. I don't know if you've heard of it or you read it or not. I think it's a must read. He lost his legs. Louis Puller lost his legs 105 round. Was booby trapped in the Riviera, and I was not there on the scene. He was in a company next to ours, and at that point I was out in the field about every 3 days out of every 10 because I'd gotten converted into a forward observer or scout observer because I was enlisted. And I heard the explosion, and you couldn't help it. It was probably half a click away, something like that. And of course, we didn't know who it was, and I only knew who he was just because he's Chesty Puller's son. How wouldn't you know who it was? And we're in the battalion compound,
exactly, right.
So he lost both legs, and he got married, or maybe he already was married. I can't recall, but he had a family, and eventually he committed suicide. And it was just heartbreaking. And there was this picture of Chesty Puller, an old man standing there next to his bed, to Louis Puller's bed, just crying away, and it was so touching to me. But that was the area in which I was used as a translator, on occasion, and mostly it was for training.
Guy who surrendered.
Right. Well, no, that was up in Khe Sanh, but
right.
This is the area in the Riviera where we were, and I knew it had to be an ironic name. It's a golf course now. I looked at a map of Vietnam, and south of Da Nang, down there south of Melbourne Mountain, it's a golf course. It's this great big golf course where the Riviera used to be, but which was just all jungle and underbrush and stuff like that, and tree lines and rice paddies. but the only time I used the language was in training. They were trying to train Vietnamese officers how to do both fire direction and forward observing. And of course, they had them paired up with people who could do that, and they were teaching people skills on the guns too. So they had them in with the 05 batteries and things.
Sure.
But anyway, so I hooked up with this captain in the Vietnamese Army, and I'll tell you, our ability to communicate was he couldn't speak English, and my Vietnamese was like drawing pictures in the sand by that point.
Right.
But it turned out that I had taken French in high school, and he spoke French because it was
a lot of
Vietnam.
Vietnamese.
He was Vietnam. Yeah, so we were able kind of to communicate, but I got to be pretty close with him. Anyway, so that was all. That's my language story.
Some French dabbled in with a little stick figure Vietnamese, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic.
Well, a lot of it was mathematics. I mean, if you're talking about shooting an azimuth here, or in direct, left, 5-0, drop 1-0, so whatever. Yeah. That's pretty. That's not hard to teach, but the nuances are a little bit difficult to get through once you get away from the numbers.
Good Lord.
So, anyway, the coming back was it was the same thing. We went over, split up immediately, didn't ever see each other again or even know what happened. We came back the same way. And it was, we got on a plane, we flew to Okinawa, didn't know really anybody who was there in Okinawa or on the plane with us there, for a couple of days, flew back to the States. In my case, I went to Treasure Island, like I told you. I was there, in the process of getting out for about 5 or 6 days and got on a plane and flew home and never, saw anybody or talked to anybody, that I had been with. I actually did eventually, years and years later, but immediately on for years didn't have any, and just basically except for a couple of friends I had who were jarheads, and they understood, they'd been there, and we could talk about stuff, but or we didn't have to talk about stuff. You know how it is. There's just a kind of just understanding, so you can just make reference to something and it's pretty much understood. But so I was really like I think most of us were pretty isolated, unless they stayed in, long enough. Say like you, Michael, 8 years, would have put you in contact with a lot of people that you would have had a much broader, set of acquaintances than I really had.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how few you keep in touch with. Just how it is. I mean, it's a meat grinder. It's unless you're in it, you don't really know what's happening in it, being the Corps. And then when you're out of the Corps, you're 2 months out of the Corps, you're so far removed. I mean, just trying to keep up with the daily grind and everything else that's going on. It's pretty crazy. It's one of those things. There's a handful of Marines and a couple of docs that I stay in touch with, through social media, what have you. But I mean, we aren't pen pals.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing to me because, for me, what it boiled down to is in doing this evolution from active to being a combat veteran now, kind of out amongst the people and everything else. I said, okay, that what drew me towards the Marine Corps spirit-wise, and to step onto the yellow footprints and all that other stuff, was the mission, essentially pointed towards that. So, for me personally, I'm an entrepreneur, so I needed to find other entrepreneurs who were as crazy about their mission as I was, right? You know what I mean? Oh, by the way, it would help if they're fellow Marines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying. I and it ties in with what we really started talking about in the writing. I mean, I would not be, I wouldn't have anything to write about. And it's not like I'm sitting around writing about war. I hardly ever really write about the the experience of war itself. I write about my feelings afterwards, or about somebody else that I know, or something like that. I don't think I would have gone and gotten a PhD, to be honest with you. I mean, there's a long-term cause and effect in my life between or been a teacher then for 30 years. That's what I. To be honest with you, the Marine Corps informed the experience of the Marine Corps informed my teaching stylistically, as well as in terms of substance, as much as more than anything else in my life. And it led me to that profession too, which is not one you make a lot of money at, by the way.
Well, maybe there's a bestseller around the corner. Who knows, Jeff? Come on, man. I'm gonna promote it. It's gonna be good.
All right. Well, I'll hook up with you on that.
There you go. Gosh, I do appreciate you sharing your time with us in this experience. This has been fantastic. We'd love to have you back on another episode here at some point in time.
Oh, I think it'd be fun. If you want to, can you just let me know?
Absolutely.
We need to hear some more of those artillery pulling Khe Sanh stories. What do you think? We got to get into the nitty gritty on it.
Yeah, we didn't get into Khe Sanh very much. That's true, and that's a whole world unto itself. So, anyway, if you got a spare slot sometime, don't hesitate to give me a buzz.
Well, there you go. You heard them, man. Right. We're holding them to it. That and the
yeah, man, for sure.
I think it's fun. Well, thank you much, both of you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And thank you, our listeners. If you haven't already done so, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can do so on iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, anywhere else that you like to listen to podcasts, by all means. Plug on in. If you want to hear more from Mr. Jeff Loeb, which I know that you do, and you want to shoot a note over Marine to Marine, by all means, leave a comment down below. Your comments, concerns, thoughts, suggestions, they make the show. Do it for you, folks. So, by all means, we would love to have you back. Mr. Jeff Loeb, thank you. It's been an honor.
Well, thanks to both of you guys. I really appreciate it. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Bennett, let me hear your war cry. And on that note, we cue the music.